Hey, everybody, and welcome to Adventures in History. Let's give this another go. Going to talk tonight about history and politics and government and such. And I hope that you're doing well, and I hope that everybody is having a good day. Um, it's been a weird one for me. We're going to see what we can do about it, though. Really just want to kind of hit the ground running here. So, yeah, we are talking history and talking government and talking politics. And this is going to be very old politics and government stuff, so not the world's most direct link to the craziness that is happening now, except for the fact that the craziness that is happening now, of course, is built on the back of doing the stuff that we did in history. So, if you were worried that all we're going to do is sit here for 2 hours and talk about modern politics, you are, I don't know, maybe let down, but also maybe relieved, because that's not what we're going to do. We are talking in a series here. This is the 10th installment of the series, and we are looking at the history of government and politics. We started all the way back before we had cities or villages, and we've gotten all the way up till the medieval period. And last time we talked about how a lot of things broke because of the collapse of Rome, and then we talked about how a lot of that stuff got kind of mushed together, and how some people tried to fix things and how it didn't end up working. But tonight we're going to start by carrying on a little bit through what we might call late antiquity and getting into the early part of what we would call the Middle Ages or the medieval period. And the big change that we're going to start seeing is needing certain parts of government to exist that don't really exist. Most notably, if we're looking at stuff like the 7, 8, 9, early 1000s, 7, 8, 900s, early 1000s, we are not going to find very many legislative bodies. Most of the law is going to be coming from a king, and that is problematic in many reasons. Obviously, if you have a good king, the kingdom might be run really well, but you can't guarantee a good king, and the kings are not necessarily going to be competent at what they're doing, and their laws can be garbage. So it would be good if you had some level of process that was involved, but we're really lacking that process. Now, there were some gatherings of peoples that might get part of the way towards making something like a legislative body, but these really weren't full out congresses or parliaments. Yeah, they were ordained by God, and we definitely went over that last time, and we're going to get back to some conflicts between our kings and the representatives of God. And we'll do that here in actually just a second. But you do start seeing some acknowledgement that the king should not really be making decisions unilaterally. So you see several different things pop up, and they have different names depending on where you are. You can see these referred to as councils. You can see them sometimes referred to as a curia, which is a Latin word that is sort of calling back to the old idea that we should make decisions in groups. You see a word witan, which is especially used in Anglo-Saxon areas or Germanic people areas. You also see the word moot, which is today used very differently than it would have been originally. If you are more familiar with Tolkien, here you go. Here's a little Tolkien thing for you. If you know about the Ent Moot Entmoot is where the Ents got together and made a decision as a group. You might see nobles doing moots as well. So, these in many cases are not really legislative in nature. They're not making laws. They're not imbued with any sort of governmental power most of the time, except for a couple of specific things. In some cases, for your heir to be legally recognized, you had to present them in front of a gathering of nobles. And at certain periods of time, especially as we get later on in time, the king is going to be expected to be chosen by some of these groups. That also works on local levels. If you're looking at some of the local positions, especially when you get into later periods of time in the 1000s or so, you might see local level officials being chosen by group. But we don't really have a parliament or a congress. The kings had the final say. Now, weaker kings that had lesser claims to the throne, or that had very little money or very little power, maybe they were very weak, they might have to defer to these councils more. But these councils were not standing bodies, right? They didn't exist all the time. It's not like they had certain days where they would meet. They didn't have a council calendar or anything like that. What's up, Chris? They kind of just got called up or sent away at the command of the king, or perhaps local councils were called up at the head of the local lord. But these were not bodies that were standing. They didn't stay active all the time. So we don't really have a lot of day-to-day governmenting going on. There's not a lot of law-making going on. There's not a lot of process going on. The average person's interaction here with a government organization might be very rare on a holiday, or maybe some day where a noble is going to have court. This is where going to court started, right? Court being the place where the noble or the king is going to actually sit. So you don't really get a lot of government interaction. And a lot of people think this is the best way to go. Like small government people are all about, wait, we only have government that happens 3 or 4 times a day. That's amazing. Well, that also means that if you have a legal case, you might have to wait 6 months before you can get any kind of motion on it. And it might take a lot more time than that before anything actually manages to happen. So, this is not today where if you are arrested in the United States, you are in front of a judge within 48 hours. This could be, you get thrown into a dungeon and you're stuck there for 6 months until the next time that there's a meeting of the council or something, right? Exhibit Scotland TV, thank you so much for the comment. I do think this is a pretty cool topic, so we're going to kind of move on in the discussion. If you have any questions, you're welcome to kind of throw those out there if you got some cool comments. So what do we have instead? Well, we've got a lot of church councils, and this is getting back to what Stephen recognized earlier, that a lot of the government is happening under the guise of religious organizations. And in many cases, the local church leadership had more power than some of the nobility. And in certain cases, church councils were going to exercise more authority than even the kings. And a lot of what the church councils are passing ends up becoming what they call canon law. Now, this is not legal law per se, but it is church law that is going to be extended to everybody that wants to remain in communion. And you want to remain in communion, because if you are not in communion, when you die, you go to the hot place. which is not the place that people want to go. It's not like going to Tahiti for vacation. This is like going to hell for all eternity, right? So if the church says this is the way that you have to act and this is the decision of the church, you kind of have to just, you have to do what they say. What's up, Brian? Welcome, Silver. Hope you all are both doing well. So you get more canon law sometimes than you're getting legal precedent from the king. And you're getting the local bishop telling you to do more things sometimes than the local noble. And the church really likes this, actually. They really appreciate being in charge of running a lot of the what we might call political or governmental apparatus of these countries, because that's going to give them not just ecclesiastical power, but real, tangible, real world power, right? Like legal power. And that goes really hand in hand with the rise of the church during the medieval period, because, again, we don't really have a lot of day-to-day governmental operations on the legal side of stuff. The church could declare things anathema, which means that you can't do them. The church could make and pass judgments on you. The church could do all kinds of stuff here. And again, that ultimate ability of removing you from communion was a threat. And this is something that they had over the nobility and even the kings as well. If you were removed from communion, this was usually an end to any sort of political or governmental position that you were holding, and perhaps even the end of your political career overall. Because if you couldn't get back in good with the church, most people were not going to follow you, because the church said if you follow the commands of this person and that person is out of the church, then guess what? You're out of the church too. What's up, Moose? Like when Kirk was on trial by the Klingons. Not exactly. Similar, but not exactly the same. Perhaps with the same level of vigor, but not with the same amount of blood, perhaps. Anyway, so we don't have a lot of government, but we do have a lot of church. So how are we doing this stuff? Well, again, not very much and not very well. Things move really slow. Things back up a lot. Grievances get really, really long. Crimes take a really long time to be heard or punished. And in many cases, things just die out before you get any kind of judgment, right? Like if you are, let's say somebody steals one of your cows and you're going to take them to the noble, and the noble's like, well, it's not time to do anything, so we'll just keep tabs on everything, and then when it comes time to have court again, we'll do court and I'll hear your case. And then the dude eats the cow. That's, dude stole your cow, dude eats the cow, now there's no evidence. So you take them to court and you say, he stole and ate my cow. And the noble goes, did you steal and eat their cow? And you go, no. And you go, where's your evidence that he stole and ate your cow? And you're like, well, I don't have any because he ate the cow. Well, guess what? Now you're out of a case. It's just your word versus their word, and the noble doesn't really care about you very much anyway. That sounds like the justice system today. I guess it's way better today. And I know that it sounds like I'm giving today's justice system a pass, but I promise you it's way better today than it used to be. Any complaints that you have about the modern justice system might have the same types of issues, but I would be very hesitant to say that most of these people today are having the same level of trouble overall with the justice system than people in the medieval period did. And I'm very well aware of how much the current justice system has affected average person's life in America. I study that stuff quite a bit. It's not good today, but it's way better than it used to be. We have a lot of stuff going on, and for all of the points that we can make about abuses of power today, We know that they're abuses of power and can point them out as abuses of power because we have written statutes, we actually have evidence, we have rights, we have the ability to do investigation, we have chains of command that are in place. Now these things fail, but I promise, like, even having all of these things is way better than the people in the ancient world used to have it. It's just way, way, way better. Again, not saying that it's perfect today, but definitely saying that it's better off today than it used to be. So we have these nobles, and they're going to do some level of action. And one of the things that nobles are going to be asked to do quite frequently is act as judges. Now, this doesn't mean very much. These nobles don't really have any kind of training, really. There's not necessarily any guidelines for this stuff. You're just supposed to listen to these cases and then decide what you think is best, right? But there's not really any judicial system outside of this. We don't really have a judicial branch in most of these places. We don't really have any sort of expectation of a certain type of judicial activity. These decisions are pretty rough. Faint praise. Yeah, I'm a government shill, right? I have my auto mod turned on what I call Puritan grandmother level, so it blocks everything the first time it comes through. So these nobles are going to pretty obviously make biased decisions. They're going to be interested in protecting their own selves. They're going to be in a position where they are not necessarily interested in the backs and forths between small, peasant people. It's really, really difficult for the average person to get justice. If the person committing the crime is a noble against a common person, you're not going to get a lot of justice in that situation in most cases. The existence of juries was there in most of these situations, but your chance of getting a jury trial is very, very small, and it's mostly only going to be for people that I said mostly only. Typically speaking, the people that are going to get jury trials are going to be the nobles, and the nobles are going to be the ones that are also in the jury with you. But if you have any kind of beef with these people, you can bet that they're going to take it out on you when they're in your jury. There's no set number of jurors that exists, so you might have 5 or, you might have 7 on this one. Who knows? They do tend to skew towards odd numbers. Just in case you can get convicted of something without a unanimous decision. So if the majority of the people on the jury are people that hate your guts, you're pretty much sunk anyway. And that's assuming you were a noble and had a position big enough to demand a trial by jury. But the average person is probably never going to be in front of a jury. They're probably going to go to a noble. The noble is going to make some sort of summary decision based on the noble's feelings of the case. And then you're going to have to be, faced with that as the alternative, because there's not really any sort of appeal system. Most of the time, whatever the government noble says is what you're going to get through. So what we see here is a lack of laws, because we're not actually publishing a lot of laws. Now, the king is obviously going to be putting out missives, and the king is going to be making declarations and things like that. But this isn't necessarily going to be stuff that's on a day-to-day sort of basis. This is mostly going to be things like how much you have to pay in taxes and how many soldiers you have to muster, and whether or not, the people at this age are going to be out of military service, or things of that nature. The vast majority of the stuff that the king is going to be doing isn't designed at day-to-day governing of the realm. It's more along the lines of making sure that the army is fit and the coffers are full. So we don't have a lot of legislative background to stand on, and our judges, who are our nobles, are making willy-nilly decisions based on whatever they want. And what this turns into is just chaos, if we're just being honest. And chaotic systems without written laws make for really bad government. And this is why a lot of the times when we look at the medieval period, a lot of people want to paint it as basically some Game of Thrones thing where people made decisions based on the ability of their military to push things through, and nobles took advantage of everybody, and there was no check or balance to anybody's power other than I can kill you or I can summon a larger army than you can. And that's not necessarily super duper far from the truth. I will say that one of the things that gets blown out of proportion a lot is mostly the numbers of peoples in armies. You didn't see 50,000 people in an army during the medieval period in most cases. Most of the armies are going to be small groups of like 20 or 30 people that are going to be in a company. You might have a couple of thousand people in a big army, but that's a big army in a lot of these situations, right? So if you're fielding 10,000 soldiers, you've got an invasion force that's almost going to be unparalleled, right? So the giant set piece battles where the entire field is just full of nothing but soldiers, that's really kind of made up and had not been a reality since like the Roman era. Most of these kingdoms are going to be too small to put that many people. Yeah, exactly. There's no way to feed that many people. You're just not going to put that many people on the field. Anyway. But there is chaos. Nobles get called on making bad decisions, but there's not really any way to, hold them accountable. The king can say something like, well, you really should have done this, but then the nobles are going to be like, well, I thought I was doing what you wanted me to do. And they're always going to have that in the background of their pocket where they can say, I was just interpreting the law how I thought. Favoritism is obviously an issue. Nepotism is obviously an issue. And when it's so obvious, it's just really, really bad for stability. And this is why so much of the medieval period deals with these conflicts, because there wasn't really a centralized rule of law. I am telling you that Braveheart isn't historically inaccurate. It's one of the most historically inaccurate movies that Hollywood's ever produced. Yeah, I know, it's kind of crazy. I'm sorry. But Braveheart is not like that. Not like that very much at all. Sorry. And even in places where you might have some form of tradition doesn't hold if everybody doesn't know the tradition. And one of the things that happens a lot in the medieval period is nobles getting reassigned to different land. Right? So if I'm over here in this territory and the king decides to move me to that territory, I move to this new area and somebody does something and they go, well, you should decide this way because this is the way we do things around here. And you can go, that's not the way that I do things. I'm used to doing things that way over there. And I don't know your local traditions, so I'm going to judge this way. And then everybody gets really upset. But there's no standard here, right? This is the problem. There's no continuity. Except for the part where that one guy got shot in the butt. That definitely happened. Yeah, for sure. Obviously, Steve. Obvious favoritism is bad for stability. I thought we weren't talking about contemporary courts. Oh, yeah, well, maybe not. But this is the issue. There's just so much stuff going on. There's not really any continuity. Kings have trouble establishing continuity, especially when the kings change so much. There are all kinds of issues with land switching. I'm taking over this territory. You're now part of this country, so you have to follow these new statutes and these new nobles. But then you have one generation under this king, and then that king dies, and then this other king from this other country that speaks a different language comes and takes over your territory. And now you're under another kind of judicial and legal system, and it's very, very different, and nobody really knows what they're doing. You can see how this just it's problematic, right? People don't live well under these circumstances. So what is the solution? Well, it's kind of understood that what needs to happen is some level of precedent. We need some type of basis on how we're going to run the country, right? Not communism. Not communism. Who hasn't gotten shot in the butt at least once? That's a fair question, Brian. I don't know. I've been shot in the butt with a BB gun several times, and with fireworks a few times, bottle rockets especially. So it's never lupus, right? That's not the solution, right? So we need some kind of precedent, and we're going to get this mostly with, well, my ancestors, the Normans. Something jumped up and bit me, right? The Normans are going to take over here in northern parts of Normandy, right? Northern France. They're going to expand here out of the Scandinavian territories down the coastline. They're also going to take over parts of England, parts of Ireland, all over the Mediterranean. But the Normans are going to kind of uniformly push this idea during the 11th and 12th centuries, so this is the 1000s and 1100s, that we need to establish some level of continuity for judgments. We need to have some level of statute that everybody follows. It's always the way that we do it. Everybody knows this. And the way that they're going to keep up with these is by making records. And the Norman nobles are going to meet together, usually during holidays. But one of the things that they do when they meet together is sit down and write out their judgments. And they'll say something like, I decided these cases. Here's why I decided these cases this way. And these records are actually kept, and you can go refer to them. So we are establishing now written precedent. And while these written precedents aren't the same as a law, they very much have the beginnings of what we are going to go on to call common law. What's up, Pi? Welcome in. And Snowlock is here. What's up? Plantagenets, let's go. We're getting there in just a second. Not too long now. Not too long. Right? So, if we establish a precedent and we can record this in a legal journal, and all of the nobles can go back and look at how these cases have been decided before, what this means is people are going to start judging things a little bit more uniformly. Now, this doesn't mean that things are going to get better overnight. This doesn't mean that things are going to immediately, go from chaos to order. It just doesn't work that way. What ends up happening, though, is when we write this stuff down, it's going to set an expectation. And the expectation is mostly going to be held intra-noble. People, everyday people, start understanding that the nobles are doing this stuff, and they start seeing the pattern. But the big issue here, and this is something that we really can't overlook during this period of time, the average medieval person in Europe can't read, right? So even if they knew that this big collection of records existed up at the noble's house, there's no way that they're going to be able to go read them because they can't read in the first place. So they can learn the precedent through seeing it happen, but that doesn't move through the population very quickly. This is mostly done by the Norman high lords to try to keep the Norman nobles in line with each other. And if the nobles stop fighting, that kind of has a trickle-down effect to the average peasant. And here, trickle-down actually does work. If the nobles stop calling for wars against each other, the poor people don't die as fast, right? So this is legitimate trickle-down, not like the garbage that started in the 80s that hasn't ever trickled down. But we start seeing an expectation. We start seeing an expectation of certain rights. Now, this does bring us back into a concept of some level of citizenship, but it's not being carried out in the same way that the Greeks did citizenship or that the Romans did citizenship. This is mostly being done through oath. And this is sort of the big thing that you've seen a bajillion times in in movies or TV shows or things like that. You're going to see people making oaths, and the people to whom I make an oath are going to give me certain terms, right? I'm going to swear to do this, and you're going to swear to do that, and this brings with it rights and expectations. Pi has asked us to do Tradle. I guess we can do that real quick. Is this where the paladins come in? Like real life paladins, or are you talking about like D&D paladins? Because I don't know. All right, let's do this real quick. 98 billion as an export. That's fairly high. Lots of copper. Lots of copper. Lots of mining stuff. Some fish stuff. So we've got some level of shipping. We've got wine. So we've got grapes stuff coming out. Okay. So a place that's on the coast that has mining and wine and fruit. Grapes, obviously, for wine. Nuts, apples, and pears. Tropical fruits. Well, that's a giveaway. Rapeseed oil, vegetable saps. We got some gold. By the way, I for those of you that have never seen me do Tradle before, I can't see you right now. I always guess on the blind, so that I'm not influenced by you all in any way. So if you're yelling countries, rubber, wine and rubber. Now that's a weird crossover. Where has grapes and rubber trees? That's really weird. 98 billion though. That's pretty big. I'm going to go with, I'm going to guess Malaysia. I am so far off. It is crazy. Okay, so obviously really far off. I've got to go to the other side of the world, probably in the South America part. Smaller country, no oil though. Wine and rubber. That's really weird though. Paraguay? Pretty close. Is this Argentina? No, it's Chile. There we go. There we go. There's Tradle for you. Ba-dum-bum. IRL paladins were later and further east. Yeah, not the rapeseed oil. Is that what gave you away the Upper Peninsula? Yeah. Zanzibar. Interesting. What's up, Rexler? Probably would have had visible beef. Visible beef. Yeah, there we go. Anyway, I make an oath to you, you make an oath to me, and we have rights and expectations now. We expect that we're going to do things the way that we said that we're going to do things. These oaths are very frequently also made in the presence of religious figures, and we're not necessarily just swearing to the other person. In many cases, we're also swearing to God. And, again, one does not make the oath to God lightly or in front of God lightly. This is not something that you're really supposed to be doing anyway if you actually read the Bible the right way, but people don't really care about that too much. The concept here, though, is we have expectations and we have rights and we have things getting written down again, right? And that is going to bring us to the person that Stephen Najarian has pushed quite heavily. Henry II. Ooh, why is that so far down? Move up. Yeah, there we go. Henry II. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Indeed. So why is Henry II such a big deal? Well, this guy is it's a big deal. So he obviously takes over here in England. This is the beginning of the Plantagenet line. Henry has an interesting background with a lot of different people in there, but he's got a lot of Norman influence, to say the least. And he is going to decide something really important, and this is that he is going to standardize and write down common law. So he's going to take all of these traditions, and he's going to take all of these precedents, and he's going to gather it and publicize it under his royal authority. So it's not necessarily now going to be these collections of records that are kept in nobles' houses. Everybody's going to be expected to show up. The king is going to go through all of this stuff. He's going to pick out the good stuff, and he's going to say, this is the way that it goes. Now, this is a big deal because this is the first time we're going to start getting back towards a unified legislative and judicial and executive working decision in one go. Because when common law gets codified, now we can train judges. We can tell them not only is this what we expect from you, but we can tell you how you should decide and tell you what the punishment should be and tell you what the king's will is going to be. So now we have guidelines. And not only do we have guidelines, we're also going to have certain permissions from the king that let you go do the judging in the first place. So the king is going to start training these nobles that are in his curia on how to administer the law equally. And then when he feels like they're ready for it, he's going to give them a writ. This is a legal document from the king that says, I can officially make legal judgments based on common law. And that's a big, important document to have, because if you are hearing cases without one of these things, none of the decisions that you make are necessarily going to be able to stick in the first place. So if the king has not authorized you to make these decisions, you're no longer capable of making them with the king's blessing. And you want the king's blessing, because if you start making a lot of bad decisions and it gets back to the king that you're doing this without his say-so, he's going to bring the hammer down on you. Because he had permission you had to get permission from him to be able to go do these things. Now, you were also required to show up at the end of the year to basically make a statement on everything that you had made a judgment on. You were expected to keep lists of decisions that you had made. You were supposed to be able to answer for the decisions that you made in front of the king. You were supposed to sit down with other nobles who had gone through the training to discuss things amongst yourself. If you had maybe a particularly interesting situation of precedent where you knew you were supposed to make this decision, but because of this one odd little thing here, you didn't know exactly what you needed to do. These are things that you need to discuss with the king and with these other nobles. And the king can then make a decision, and it gets published to all of the judges, and this is the new precedent for everybody. Did you talk to the king? Did you talk the king into giving him your blessing at the bar where he would be drinking, hence passing the bar? The bar exam, as it is today, goes back to a rather old way of teaching and learning. In the old forms of education, the person teaching would be sitting down, and all of the people listening would be standing up. So this is where we get the department chair concept. Like, I'm the chair of this department. That position meant that if all of the professors were in the room and all of them were talking, the person that was the chair got to sit in the chair because there was only one chair, right? So you were the chair. But anyway, when you had to prove that your knowledge was justifiable, you would stand literally at a bar, and it was like we might call it today like a rail. And the person giving you the examination would be seated, and they would just be firing questions at you while you stood there at the bar, and you had to pass the bar. So like if you answered all of the questions, they would give you this position. And today it's just a big, I think that they have actually digitized all of it now. I think it's all on a computer. But yeah. So you literally had to give the defense while standing in front of all these people who are just firing questions at you at a rail, because this is the way that the teaching rooms would be little, not like really big amphitheaters, but sort of smaller amphitheaters, and they would have rails because you would lean on the rail, like lecture halls, right? Yeah. So, there actually is like a rail, and you would sort of stand there listening to people talk, but then when it was time to, you'd have to give your defense. Yep. What's up, Tuna? I'm sorry, not Tuna. Lumpy. What's up, Lumpy? Who could become a judge, and what was the advantage? Nobles only. You had to be in the king's curia to get one of these writs. And the advantage was you got fabulously wealthy. Because one of the things that you could do as a judge was fine people. And another thing you could do as a judge was confiscate their property. And now you're seeing the advantage of being in the curia and getting one of these writs from the king. Because you're going to go to all the little areas and you're going to administer fines. And those fines, in many cases, go straight into your pocket. Now, you're supposed to pay. This is why you're supposed to keep a record of everything, right? You're supposed to keep a record of all the decisions that you made and the punishments and the penalties that you assigned. But, if some, rich dude wanted to pad his pockets and then not put it on the docket, there you go, right? There you go. Free fruits and vegetables, right? Your enemy that just happens to show up in your court, whose land borders yours, suddenly made a bad decision, and now you can confiscate all that land along your border that you've been after. Judges get wealthy. Some things never change, right? Right? Yeah. I guess I thought that at points being a judge was a responsibility that wasn't sought and often shirked by nobles. Now, prior to this period, it was not something that most nobles liked doing, right? Sitting in the office, sitting in the throne room and making decisions about, peasants arguing over chickens is not fun, and it's not something that a lot of people wanted to do. But when common law got established under the Norman rule, and especially when common law concepts got passed around to other countries and started spreading through Europe, everybody likes that stuff, right? If you can get okayed to collect penalties, yeah, you want to do that. because that's gonna make you fabulously wealthy. Still want to know where those tariffs are going. If we're collecting them, they're going into the budget. They're being held right now in the bank account of the Customs and Border Patrol, but those are going to get turned over to the Treasury at the end of the fiscal year. You just want to go invade Ireland. Note: everybody does not include commoners. This is true. Are they though? If they're being collected, because to be very clear, most of the tariff calculation stuff has not been entered properly for a lot of places, and a lot of shipments are not been properly programmed into the Customs and Border Patrol systems so that they can apply them. There are still some people getting basically "you owe us" certificates that are sort of like reverse IOUs from Customs, which means that once Customs figures out how much this person is supposed to pay, they're going to get a bill later. I'm assuming most nobles had some form of advisor that did most of the menial judgments. Probably so. If we're talking about like day-to-day things between peasant people, yeah, probably so. But if you were going to be sitting in the chair doing the big deal thing, you needed to be you, right? Theoretically, lawfully, yeah, right. You're going to buy a box of paper on Amazon. They wanted to tag you a $64 shipping and handling for things that you've ordered in the past. Wow, that's crazy. Crazy talk. All right, so we're going to train judges. We're also, under Henry II, going to solidify specific rights, powers, and procedures. One of the things that happens in common law is that you get your powers enumerated, which is, not necessarily good for you because you liked not having a list of rights. You wanted to be able to do whatever you wanted, but the king is now going to write down what you can and what you can't do, and this is good for the common people, right? Now, this isn't to say that all of this is perfect, and obviously abuses of law still happened because they still happen today. But we're moving towards a better structure, right? We are moving back towards organized, centralized rule of law. And the people that this actually makes the most angry is the church. And Henry II runs quite afoul of the church. And they are very, very upset with this guy. And you're like, but wait, isn't he bringing peace and justice to the people of the Norman lands? And the answer is yes, he is. But what he's also doing is he is filling a gap with legal royal authority that had previously, for I would say about the last between 500 to 400 years or so, had been filled by the church. So remember those church canon laws, and the church is hearing judgments, and the church is making decisions, right? What's up, Wax? Good to see you. Welcome in. Was he worse than murdering Becket? So Thomas Becket is one of these people that enters the picture that ends up dead. That has a lot of blowback, and Henry II actually has to back off some of his. We're not going to go through the whole thing with all of the ins and the outs of that. We're going to try to stay on the government side of stuff, right? There's a whole very interesting story here that could probably be a viewer request stream about Henry and the church, and the Pope gets involved. Of course, right? The Pope is upset that the concept of common law is being established and that this might spread to other countries, which it did. So the church isn't pleased. Now, we're moving, though. Constitutions are next. And I know everybody gets really excited about constitutions. Let's talk about constitutions. Okay, cool, let's do it. To be fair, the Pope is always poking around. That's fair. That's fair. The incident is very fun. Who will rid me of this meddlesome streamer? A viewer request stream in some point in the future, Stephen. If you would like to redeem one of those, I'll put you on the list, and we could do Henry II. But we're trying to stay in government and politics lane right now. Henrys and popes don't get on. It's a thing. This is true. You can redeem Lord of the Rings. That is a theory that has never been tested before. There has not been precedent for that. You would have to ask for that and see what the Supreme Court decided. Typically, viewer requests in the past, for the last 100 viewer requests, have all been history related. I don't know if buying Lord of the Rings history would work, because then everybody would just buy Lord of the Rings history. You just have to bribe the court at Gen Con. When we gather together for our yearly meeting, you can put a bug in someone's ear. I'm not getting paid to review Lord of the Rings history. I have considered like literally selling viewer request streams like for money. Like how much money would somebody give me for a stream? I'd be interested to entertain that concept. Why would I not? Because it sort of makes me feel dirty. I love the leans in. I'm already getting paid. Yeah, this is, I don't know. We'll talk about that later, Maddie. We'll talk about that later. That's the sort of stuff that I'm worried about, Paradox. That's exactly the stuff that I'm worried about. Anyway, so, dude, Steve Sketches, if you're being for real about that, I would totally do that, hand to heart. Anyway. So, why constitutions? Well, here's the thing. We've had documents of law around for a while, right? We've talked about law codes going all the way back to Mesopotamia in, like 5,000 years ago kind of stuff almost. So why is a constitution different? Well, first off, because a constitution is a little bit different than just a law code. A law code is just, here's everything that the king says, right? A constitution implies that there's some sort of consensus involved with making this document, right? These are going to establish the laws of the land, but it's not just one person writing a whole bunch of stuff down and then saying, boom, here's the law. So constitutions are a little bit different. Why constitutions? Because right now the U.S. Attorney General is claiming that habeas corpus means that the president can exile and arrest anyone. I think that was Kristi Noem, and she's the Secretary of Homeland Security.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
Okay, I heard the sound. Did you hear the sound? And Tuna, thank you for donating the gift sub to Steve Sketches. I heard it and the volume was good. I spent about 45 minutes poking at that today. I'm glad that it worked. I'm glad that it finally worked. I did a lot of work today on the stream. If you go to the front page of Twitch now, you can actually see new links. I made new panels for all of my links. I added the YouTube link. I edited a lot of the wording and a lot of the links to try to clarify some stuff. And made a couple of changes. Anyway, so there's some stuff. I did a lot of work today on that. I also did a lot of work on stuff like the YouTube channel. I pushed a lot of stuff over there, set a whole bunch of stuff up. So lots of work on that today. Now, who is going to be the first one that really tries to make these constitutions? That's a tough question to answer. It's going to be really, really hard to say. There are a lot of people that are going to point at the Magna Carta, obviously, and we'll talk about the Magna Carta here in just a second. But there are arguments to be made that that's not necessarily the first constitution. You can look at some of the agreements made between nobles and the king of Spain prior to that could potentially be a constitution. You can look at the stuff happening in some of the Eastern European countries. But it's hard to really put a finger on it. There had already been some things that had been called constitutions. Henry II had passed these collections of things called the Constitutions of Clarendon. Those actually had to get kind of rolled back because this is some of the stuff where he ran afoul of the church and got smacked really hard by the church. It was basically trying to make an old school version of separation of church and state, and the church did not care for it at all. There had been some limits that Henry I had agreed to, but the basic idea here is that the people that are going to be on the forefront of this are going to be the English. And the idea is really going to kick into high gear, mostly because King John sucked, right? King John was a horrible king. And one of the things that we can point at here is we know he was bad because we have evidence of him going against things that had just recently been set up. One of the reasons we know that King John was bad is that he basically allowed the nobles to ignore common law. He ignored his favorite nobles abusing the court structures, especially with fines and confiscations. And he overstepped boundaries of common law, and especially with things like who could be punished with certain types of things. He was incredibly strict on laws that had not previously been considered that big of a deal. He goes just way overboard. And the abuse of the courts and the ignorance towards common law is what's really going to make the nobles have enough of John. Now, he was also personally not really that good of a person to be around. He had a fairly foul temper. He was rather spoiled. He didn't really like being told no. So, as I recall from your own studies, he's the reason toilets are called Johns. Well, this is true if you follow a certain historian. This is the historian Brooks. If you are familiar with the work of Melonius Brooks. I don't actually know what Mel Brooks' first name is. Is it just Mel, or is it short for Melvin? I don't know. I just made up Melonius. We're referring here, of course, to Robin Hood Men in Tights, which is one of my favorite Mel Brooks movies. But the idea here is he did all this stuff that was against the precedent. And we know that it was against the precedent because the precedent had been established. And when we establish the precedent, we build all the stuff on top of the precedent, and people get used to things being this way. Here comes John being a jerk, and they're like, no, you can't do that anymore. You can't do that anymore because we have these agreements. You can't do this anymore because we have this precedent. You can't do this anymore because we have these guidelines, these regulations. You just can't, right? So this is where the Magna Carta comes in. Now, we can talk a lot about the Magna Carta, but one of the things that I might tell you today that might hurt your feelings or might be a surprise to you, and that is when the Magna Carta got passed, it really wasn't that big of a deal. The Magna Carta was signed by force by King John. The nobles basically forced him to sign it on pain of death, very painful death. So he did sign it in 1215, and then it got revoked like less than a year later. And then it got reissued, but then it got revoked again. And then it got reissued again, and it got pulled back again, and it got edited, and then it got put forward again. It didn't really stick. So why do we look back at the Magna Carta as this masterful piece of literature that just absolutely solidified the path of the modern United States Constitution and all constitutional governments forever? And the idea behind the Magna Carta is actually more important than the Magna Carta itself. What actually did it do? Well, it mostly protected nobles. If we're being really, really honest, most of the stuff that the Magna Carta contains was protections for nobles against the king. It limited amounts of fines that nobles had to pay. It made the king recognize the law. They were forced by law to recognize the law. What's up, Claire? It verified and solidified common law being in place. And this is obviously a very, very good thing for the average person in England. But this is also going to establish the earliest parliament, where the king was required to call up parliament when making certain decisions. And this was a meeting of nobles that was supposed to discuss things with the king. But here's the thing. Even when the Magna Carta was finally instituted and carried on, people still ignored it. For about 200 years, people pretty much ignored it. They remembered it when they wanted to, but it's not like everybody followed it to the letter. When nobles wanted to skirt things, they skirted stuff. When kings wanted to skirt things, they skirted things. When the kings needed to suck up to the nobles, they would make a really, really big show of calling parliament together and bringing out the Magna Carta and talking about how great it was that everybody da-da-da-da-da, right? We can get Shane to talk for another hour at least. This is why rule of law is better. Sure, right? So really, Trump is following Magna Carta precedent by ignoring the Constitution when he wants to. Frank, in a certain way, yes, that's accurate. Ignoring it when it's beneficial and applying it with poor understanding in other cases and very, very, very literally in other cases. But for a long time, the Magna Carta was just sort of there, and it was a thing that we thought about when we wanted to, but then if we didn't want to, we didn't. And if the king was being really, really bad, the nobles might get together and yell about the Magna Carta. But if things are going okay and the king was being kind of chill and the nobles were getting away with things, they really didn't care very much about it. It wasn't until much later that the Magna Carta and subsequent acts of Parliament really began to make a substantial difference. But that's going to be something for the next stream. Wasn't that kind of the point? It was kind of the point from the point of the nobles. And again, the average person in England wasn't going to be able to read it anyway. The point was hopefully that they could get along with the king better and have more things elucidated and more things enumerated so that there was something to fall back on when the disputes arose. But that doesn't mean that the Magna Carta solved all the problems. Even when disputes arose, people would go drag the Magna Carta out and the king would just tell them to shove off, right? And if you were a minor noble that couldn't really do anything about it, all you could do is try to go tell all the other nobles that he was ignoring the Magna Carta and try to convince enough people that were nobles that might be in Parliament that they needed to kind of go do something about it. But if you were a minor noble with a cause anyway, you probably didn't have the money that you would need to bribe your way into everybody else's favor. So even with the Magna Carta in place, the solutions to most of these injustices were not presented. We didn't have a unified, centralized rule of law. We had a document that had a lot of precedent, that stood with some level of force to act people.
You shall have camels, horses, an armed escort, provisions, desert vehicles, and tanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Claire, for the corgi bits. I'm actually trying to think about something else that might be the audio for that, especially something with a clip. But I don't know exactly what it would be. So basically, it mattered how popular and powerful you were. If you had influence and power, you could ignore it. If you were weak, it would be forced to adhere to it. Exactly, Steven. Exactly. What's up, Fiasco? Wrong stream for that one, my friend. Wrong stream. But yeah, so that's where we're going to call it for this one. But obviously, if anybody has questions about stuff, we can continue to answer questions. Good many of the lords of the time were illiterate too, so many of the... yeah, exactly. Even if you were a noble, there was no guarantee that you had the training that you would need to be able to read these things. Which is why most of the people that were nobles weren't in a position to end up being one of the Curia members that got the writ to do judgment stuff, right? It's never the wrong time for a party. It's never the wrong stream for a history party. I see. Well, Claire, we've been going since 7. Where do judges' black robes come from? Tuna, I'm not 100% sure. I just know that it's a somber color, and you are supposed to be a somber and sober individual. I would suspect that that is at least part of the concept, but not all judges' robes are black. There are other countries where judges wear other colors, so I don't know. Is it related to the wigs? Yeah, so especially the powdered white wigs, that goes back to the same precedent where I'm supposed to be a wizened and intellectual individual, and the wig symbolizes my old age and wisdom, right? But I'm not sure exactly where that tradition started, or where 100% sure what the original symbolism behind it would mean. I would suspect that if I had to do the educated guess thing, right? I would say probably Enlightenment period, and in either France, England, or Germany. If I just had to guess. In a way, Trump follows this trend too. Kinda, sorta. Ye wise old sage. Indeed, right? That's the idea. So there's some progress here, right? We went from effectively late antique and early medieval chaos to having common law and having some level of written document that we're supposed to fall back to. But things are obviously not like steady yet. So if you want to look ahead to what's going to happen next, on episode 11, we are going to look at a big dispute that comes up because of this change. And we're going to look at some early Enlightenment ideas that are going to persist through the Enlightenment, through the development of a lot of other ideologies. But we're going to do this one first. And we're going to look at the difference between absolutism and constitutional monarchy. And the big argument here is, should the king have absolute power or should he have limited power? And this is a really, really big debate. Really, really big debate. And that's what most of the next stream is going to be. We're also going to look at stuff like Venice and the Netherlands, who had a couple of Renaissance and early Enlightenment models of government that weren't purely monarchical. Next time on Dragon Ball Z. Yeah. What's in the news? I get to pick what's in the news. What is in the news? So much stuff with Trump. I don't want to talk about him anymore, though. I don't know. Let me look. Krillin dies. Yeah, well, so does Yamcha. Man, it's pretty much just like Trump and Gaza. Oh, here's a good news thing. Romania had its second round of votes, and the situation in Romania was kind of a mess. So the election that they had not too long ago ended up getting a lot of question marks about it. So then they kind of redid the thing, and the guy that won, his name is Nikusur Don, and he is a pro-EU, pro-Western leader. And this is kind of an upset because the person that was at the head of the polls after the first round of voting was this dude named George Simeon, who is very much like pro-Russia, anti-EU, what we might call hard right. And the first round of voting went to him, and it looked like he was going to end up coming out ahead. But Don ended up winning. And of course, now Simeon has said that the election was tampered with, and specifically that France had gotten involved and tampered with the election. Of course, the initial claim was that Russia had gotten involved in the election to help one of their people get, like, involved. So I am really good at debates, and I would say that I was a master. But yeah, that one's pretty obvious there, Fiasco. Ben Trent's, apparently Brexit is dead. I have seen people talking about this. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that any kind of complete reunion of England with the EU is out of the question. Now, they did just pass a pretty big finance bill, and they did produce a series of smaller elements that are going to cover things like travel. And this is going back towards the British getting involved, but I don't think that this is going to be like a full British rejoining of the EU, because I don't think that the British would get as cushy of a deal as they got when they joined the European Union the first time. I think that if they tried to rejoin the EU right now, they would want the same deal that they had the first time, and they're not going to get it. Most specifically, they're not going to give up the British pound. It's just not going to happen. And the EU's not going to let them back in without that. So, I mean, there's some rapprochement happening there, but I don't think that even the specter of Trump being who he was is going to push them back in the same relationship again. I think Britain is understanding that it needs to be a little bit more involved with the European Union, and the European Union definitely wants British money back, but they're not going to give up the pound. Too many on again, off again. The EU says off for good. Yeah, that's pretty much what I think a lot of the people in the EU are kind of like wary about is, Starmer's government right now is making some headway at rebuilding some faith with the British people after the collapse of the last Conservative government. But a lot of people are not upset with, a lot of people are upset with Labour right now. As noted by Nigel Farage's party winning a special election, right? Which is crazy, but it happens. So the Conservatives left a ticking time bomb that blew up in Labour's face, and I think that they're going to try to do whatever they can to collect whatever bits of their economy is left and move forward into the future. But you got to think that the EU is looking at England right now going, if they elect the Tories next time, are they going to like re-Brexit again, right? That's going to be the U.S. relationship to the world regarding everything going forward, pretty much, right? Because I don't think anybody is going to... it's going to take 20 plus years of stable government and governance in the United States to rebuild the reputation of the United States that has been lost since January the 20th. So in the last 4 months, Donald Trump has managed to tear down 100 years of American good favor in the world, and it will take us at least 20 years to make it back up. And that's assuming that he stopped right now. He's still got more than 3.5 years left. So, but we're not going to talk about him anymore. Who is streaming? I tell the truth, Steven. I tell the truth. Oh, Casey. Sorry. Yeah. But we could do shout-outs. So everybody go follow Casey, who is a great artist and has just a very delightful chat room to be in. Casey was doing some painting outside today, and then hung out with some animals. That was pretty cool stuff. Steven Jerian obviously is good friend of the chat who I jilted tonight by not talking about Lord of the Rings. But he, in his own words, he likes painting dragons and snowy mountains. So you should go follow Steve and Jerry, and you should also go follow Steve Sketches, who's here, who does all kinds of traditional art, and specifically is working on a new RPG system and world that you can go hang out and be a part of. Cave Geek is in the house. Cave obviously is a friend of the channel, longtime supporter, and does fantasy maps and also plays games. I saw Nixolotl pop in very quietly and hang out for a little bit. Nixolotl is the artist in charge of our beloved puppy head pat emote. You should go follow Nixolotl. We had E to the 2i Pi in here, who is a math streamer and does some computer programming. He was doing some computer programming earlier. So if you are interested in learning math or some light computer programming stuff, you should go follow E to the 2i Pi. Who else did we have in here that was streaming? Oh, we got Fiasco in here. Theme Fiasco is a fellow Gunpla builder who also plays video games. I think next stream would probably be tomorrow, Fiasco? Tomorrow Gunpla build, and then Friday Fortnite? Is that accurate? Man, lots of people hanging out in here. Doing good stuff. I think I got everybody. Did I get everybody? It's games during the week, but you don't know which game to play. Okay, my bad. You should go follow Silver Pills and give him a whole bunch of follows so that he starts streaming again, because I miss him streaming. But yeah. All right. Where are we going to go? Let's go raid Crumpet. We haven't raided Crumpet in a while. Where's the button? Start raid. So we're going to go raid Noble Crumpet, who is a artist and game player and RPG runner. Ooh, there's Noger. Who is a philosophy streamer and is very intelligent, and you should go follow him because he reads philosophy papers and makes things easy for you to understand. I wasn't trying to do that quickly. I've got the raid timer running now. Okay, so thanks to everybody. Let's say thanks to everybody that came in today. Thank you, Tuna, for the gift sub to Steve Sketches. Thank you, Claire, for the Corgi bits. You can see everybody that is subscribed with a really cool badge that you see here in chat. As a reminder, though, you do not have to subscribe here on Twitch for support. If you would like to support the stream, there is also Patreon, which you can see there. If you want to do the command Patreon, which I can't type, you can see the link there. There is also this link here, which will take you to the Amazon reading list. I've changed that now to where if you want to give me things that aren't on the list, you can. Please don't feel the need to, and please don't get obscene. But some people were asking, hey, can I send you this? Sure, why not? Yeah, there we go. So there's a raid. And I'll see everybody later.